everyone has the turkey in the oven almost and ready to celebrate a great Thanksgiving. So thank you for being here with us this morning. If everyone would remember to please put your phones on silent, we would appreciate it. We are going to start off today different than what we have been doing, and we are going to have a prayer offered by our chaplain.
Please bow your heads and pray with me. Father God, we give you so much thanks this week, Father. Thank you for another time of holidays and celebration, Lord, that we're coming into. Father, I pray this morning that your favor and your protecting hand be upon everyone on the city council, everyone here from the city attorney's office and their staff, Lord, from the city manager's office. God, you know what an incredible burden it is to be responsible for such a large city. Father, we're thankful for these servants and their hearts to come before you today, to come before the city and the citizens they represent, Lord, and make hard decisions. God, I pray that your support would be upon them. I pray that the support of all of our city and citizens would be upon them, Lord. God, give them peace and comfort. And I pray that you'd also give them wisdom, Father God, the same wisdom that you gave Solomon, Lord, for making decisions. I pray that you would give each one of these members on our council, Lord, the strength of David, to stand up to the big problems and the big challenges, God, when no one else will. Father, I pray for all of our families in our community that have been touched by tragedy in the last 2 weeks. I pray that that cycle would end over this holiday season, Lord. So for everyone in our community that has something to celebrate, God, I pray that they would give you thanks. And for everyone who's hurting or mourning this week, Lord, I would also pray that they would seek out your face, Father. We ask that your will would be the point and the agenda for today. God, protect our firefighters and first responders that are having to work this week, Lord. We ask that you protect the 4 sons from San Angelo that are on their way back from California fires right now, Lord. Get them home safe to us, Father. We pray this, and we just give you so much glory and honor, God. Your ways are so much higher than ours, and your thoughts are so much higher than ours. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
We are lucky today to have Jeremiah Tackett here to help us do the pledges. He is a 7th grader at TLCA, and he is the son of Sarah Tackett. So thank you for being here this morning. Shall we turn around and start with this flag?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
If everyone will please be seated, we will start with our proclamations. And the first one that we have today is a proclamation of November 24th, 2018 as Small Business Saturday. This is when we say shop local, support local, give local. And thank you for being here and supporting this community by shopping in San Angelo. The government of San Angelo, Texas celebrates our local small businesses and the contributions they make to our local economy and community. According to the United States Small Business Administration, there are currently 30.2 million small businesses in the United States. They represent 99.7% of all businesses with employees in the United States and are responsible for 65.9% of net new jobs created from 2000 to 2017. Do we have anyone in the audience today to accept this proclamation? I'll continue. Small businesses employ 47.5% of the employees in the private sector in the United States. 90% of the consumers in the United States say Small Business Saturday has had a positive impact on the community. 89% of consumers who are aware of Small Business Saturday said the day encourages them to shop small all year long. 73% of the consumers who reportedly shopped small at independently owned retailers and restaurants on Small Business Saturday did so with friends or family. The most reported reason for consumers aware of the day to shop and dine at small, independently owned businesses was to support their community. San Angelo supports our local businesses that create jobs, boost our local economy, and preserve our communities. Advocacy groups, as well as public and private organizations across the country, have endorsed the Saturday after Thanksgiving as Small Business Saturday. Therefore, I, Brenda Gunter, Mayor of the City of San Angelo, Texas, on behalf of the City Council, do hereby proclaim Saturday, November 24th, 2018, as Small Business Saturday, and urge the residents of our community and communities across the country to support small businesses and merchants on Small Business Saturday and throughout the year. Our second proclamation, Lee, would you like to come forward, is December 1, 2018 as Concho Christmas Celebration Day. 2018 marks the 25th anniversary of the San Angelo Concho Christmas Celebration's annual Tour of Lights. The celebration, with over 3 million lights, is one of the largest Christmas lighting events in the state of Texas. The event offers a 2.5-mile walking or driving tour beginning behind the main post office on the corner of Abe Street and First Street and ending in El Paseo de Santa Angela. Those involved consist of hundreds of community volunteers who greet tour guests, inmates from the Department of Corrections who assist with installation of Christmas scenes, the San Angelo Restaurant Association who supply meals to the inmates, and the RSVP volunteers who deliver the inmates' meals. The community Christmas tree lighting ceremony will be held Saturday, December 1st, 2018 at 5:15 p.m. at the corner of South Chadbourne and West Concho Avenue. Activities will include the San Angelo Community Band conducted by Dr. Constance Kelly, Evangelo State University, and the Twin Mountain Tonesmen directed by Mark Clark. The community tree lighting will be followed by the 17th annual Lights of Christmas Parade at 6 p.m., which may be viewed on Chadbourne between 2nd Street and Concho Avenue, on Concho Avenue between Chadbourne and Oaks, on Oaks back to 2nd Street. The Tour of Lights can be seen Sunday through Thursday from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. and each Friday and Saturday from 6 p.m. to 12 midnight, December 1st through December 31st, 2018. Therefore, I, Brenda Gunter, Mayor of the City of San Angelo, Texas, on behalf of the City Council, do hereby proclaim Saturday, December 1st, 2018 as Concho Christmas Celebration Day and encourage citizens to join the activities and view the magnificent holiday lights that have become a community treasure. Thank you, Lee.
Very much.
And that's going to be unusual this year because Christmas at Fort Concho is a different weekend.
Right, that's because we're on our 25th, and this is our 25th year, and we decided to run it for the entire year. So we backed up and gave Bob a free pass for his weekend, so we don't confuse him with a lot of parking problems.
It's fantastic. Thank
We're
you.
just trying to coordinate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's get a picture.
Okay.
Oh, well, then let me say something. I'm sorry.
Let me say a couple of things. It's a great honor for me to accept this community recognition for the hundreds of the tens of thousands of happy smiles and warm hearts that are generated by the 400 to 600 volunteers that help each year to put on Concho Christmas Celebration. We've been doing this for 25 years, as we said. And this year, the privately funded Tour of Lights will be our silver anniversary event, and it's going to be the best ever. And we'd like to invite the entire community to come down and join us along Concho Avenue on the Concho River to celebrate our silver anniversary.
And we're certainly inviting other communities to come.
And a
spend
lot
their
of southern,
dollars here, too.
incidentally, about 25% of the people, we have about 75,000 people go through the Tour of Lights each year, and between 25 and 30% of them are out-of-town guests based on the surveys we get. And I really think could be higher than that simply because they don't fill out a lot of out-of-town people don't fill out the survey because they don't feel like they're going to be here to collect the $1,000 reward. Oh, now we do it? With the picture?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We will now open the meeting up for public comment, and the first thing I'd like to say today is Sulphur Draw is open. The barricades are gone. You can actually drive and not take a detour. So thank you for all the city staff for making sure the contractor met those deadlines, and that we've got the street open for this holiday season. So thank you very much for that.
I'd like to add to that.
Yes,
The,
go ahead, Wayne.
the boxes, the Christmas boxes that are going to be over off of Paseo will be open just in time. And I want to reiterate that. Thank you all for the staff for meeting those requirements of getting it done before that time.
Right. Issues or items that are not on the agenda may be raised by the public at this time. Citizens should speak from the podium, begin by stating their name, and limit remarks to less than 3 minutes. Council members may request the discussed item be placed on a future agenda. The council takes public comment on all regular agenda items during the discussion of those items. Do I have anyone in the audience who would offer some public comment at this point? Steve, come on up.
Thank you, Council. Thank you very much. I just wanted to bring out a few points. I was not able to attend last time.
We
because-
noticed your absence,
I
I
know,
will
it was
tell you.
awful quiet
We all
around here,
wondered if you were
wasn't
sick.
Quick.
Yeah, we
watched
got
it-
through this. in
I watched it
record
on
time.
TV and it was boring, so anyway, thank you for your comments. I just wanted to bring up a couple of points. The lakes are full after record rains, and that needs to be noted. I think the faith and diligence of our churches in the area have brought around a miracle, and I want to commend them for it. And I was in the polls, working the polls last time is one reason I wasn't here, and the electorate have shown their colors also in that the bonds failed, and it shows that there's a desire on the public to hold back, that governments ought to be aware that their citizens are hurting and unhappy if you do not heed their vote. I know that it's hard. I know that it's hard to say no. There's a lot of need and a lot of things that have been passed over, but we can only do so much at a given time. And so I would like you to just keep that in mind as you go throughout the actions that you're enlisted in. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Further public comment? Good morning.
I'm Michelle Babish, and my husband Jody and I own Old Central Firehouse Bed and Brew. And we just wanted to come in this morning and really just thank the city and the staff. Everyone has been just so wonderful, so supportive. I would name names, but I'll forget a whole bunch, so I'm not going to. But everybody, I mean, we've had questions, we've had needs, and the city has been so great to just be there every step of the way. Our project is about, I don't know, half or 3/4 of the way done, and we couldn't have done it without everybody at the city.
Thank you.
So we just wanted to say thank you.
And I would say thank you to you and your husband, because that was a major project to take on, and you dove right in. I mean, from the day that you bought it, you started work on it, so you were ready to go, and it has, on a daily basis, changed and improved that area. It looks terrific, so keep on doing the great work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Further public comment?
Mayor, Mr. City Manager, Council, Assistant Fire Chief Todd Sanford. I'd just like to update you a little bit on our firefighters that went to California. It happened real quick. It was a holiday weekend, so not everybody at council and the public knew what was going on. But a little over a week ago, Sunday morning at 6:30 in the morning, I got a call asking if we would be willing to send our new Tiffmas fire truck and our firefighters to California to help fight the wildfires out in California. So we started working that morning. We worked about 11 hours that day getting the crews ready, doing paperwork. They finally called us late that night and said that it was a go. So we sent them. They left at about 9 o'clock Monday morning, drove, got to California, and they went to the Woolsey Fire, Southern California, did mop up, a lot of public communications, safety type stuff, working with the citizens that had lost everything up there. And talked to these gentlemen daily. They were working 24-hour shifts. They're exhausted, but I think they've been really blessed from the situation, and I know that what we did was the right thing to do. I want to tell the public how this works. The Tiffmas fire truck was a state fire truck that was given to us. It did not cost us anything. And from 2 hours prior to our deployment till 24 hours after they come back to San Angelo, it is paid by the state of Texas, all expenses. So it did not cost the city one penny, and we were able to go to California and help people that had lost everything. I can't tell you how proud of my firefighters I am. I received numerous calls from other fire chiefs that are in California with our guys, telling me what wonderful men they were. They weren't asked to do something. They said, what can we do? The people up there were taking pictures with them, hugging them, telling them thank you. And so I just want the council to know the program we have in place is unbelievable. We're helping other people, and it's not costing us anything except some time and a little effort on our part. But what we're doing out there is the right thing to do, and I really appreciate y'all for supporting our Tiffmas program, supporting us. And to the public, I just want to say thank you. You've been praying for my men. You're still praying. They left Phoenix, Arizona this morning, have another day and a half drive to get home. They're going to be home by Thanksgiving, and I'm real thankful for that. But I just wanted to say thank y'all for your support and let the public kind of know how that process took place.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
And we do want to thank the staff who went out there. We're certainly blessed in San Angelo not to live with the fires that California has been devastated by. So thank you for the time, effort, and energy in getting that organized, Todd. Any further public comment? With no further public comment, we will move into our consent agenda. I will start with Tommy. Do you have anything that you would like to pull from the consent agenda?
No, ma'am.
Tom?
No, ma'am.
Harry?
C.
C, item C. Lucy?
None.
And Lane?
No, ma'am.
Okay. With pulling item C, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move to approve.
Is there any public comment? With no public comment, we will take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
With none opposed, motion passes 7-0. Item C, consider approving by board contract number 524-17 from Paradigm Traffic Systems, Inc., Houston, Texas, in the amount of $197,400 budgeted in fiscal year 2019 for the purchase of Alpha battery backup systems and authorizing the city manager to execute any related documents. Harry, you have a question?
Sure. Patrick, the only thing I have here is it shows 197,400 here, but in the background information, it indicates that there's a financial impact of $220,000. So figure out what those two numbers are.
The discrepancy there, yes, sir. The 197,400 is what council approved in the last budget council that's going to be used in dedication for this this project. The additional 20,000 you'll see coming up later this afternoon or this morning in the carryover request. There's 20,000 of salary savings that we moved over for the initial battery backup project. that we're asking to carry over into that, it accumulates that purchase as well. Since the whole net purchase for this fiscal year will be over that 50,000 mark, we're asking for the full approval.
Thank you. I just wanted the citizens to understand what that was from, so move to approve is presented.
Is there a second? Any public comment? With no public comment, we'll take a vote. And before we take a vote, may I say that that the consent agenda was not approved by 7-0, because there's only 6 of us here. And so the motion was approved 6-0. So thank you for that. All right. On item C, I have a motion, a second, no public comment. We'll take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 6-0. We'll move into the regular agenda item. Item 7, item A. First reading and public hearing of an ordinance approving case PD 18-03, a rezoning from the single-family residence RS1 and general commercial zoning districts to the planned development PD zoning district to allow for uses permitted in the general commercial CG zoning district with the principal use of campground recreational vehicle park being 16.36 acres located to the north and northwest of the Lake Nasworthy addition, Group Fisherman's Road residential subdivision, and the presentation is by John James.
Thank you. John James, Director of Planning and Development Services. This is the Spring Creek area, and you can see the boundary. It includes not only, if you're familiar with the lease out there, the lease for the RV park is something like this, but we've gone out to the water's edge to include that area as well, to incorporate some of the other activities that are happening there also. The basics of what we're doing here is you can see the general commercial here in pink does not encompass all of that area. So one thing we're doing is expanding that boundary to include all of the area within which commercial type activities are occurring. As you can see here, the yellow zoning there is single family residential. So some of the things that are part of existing leases out there actually aren't allowed under the zoning. So this cleans that up to allow those uses. The other thing it does is ensures that all of the things that are within those leases are allowed under the zoning, some of which may not always be allowed in the general commercial. And that's the reason for the plan development, so that we could specifically list out those uses that are occurring out there now, as well as anticipating some of the future uses that have been discussed for that area if those lease terms change. Again, this zoning it will only allow those things to happen under the zoning on the property. As the owner of the property, the city, and you all ultimately can still control through the lease what can and can't happen on. So it really takes both. Just because you adopt a zoning ordinance that allows certain uses on the property, the lease would still have to allow those as well. So you kind of have two opportunities to say yes or no to things. But if there are things in the future that you would like to see on the property, even if you include it in the lease, they still can't operate those on the property without it also being in the zoning. Just a few pictures of the area in case there are questions. You're probably familiar with the uses out there, largely the RV park that's out there, as well as the Thule Princess, and this incorporates that use as well. I won't read through all of these. They're in your background information, but basically the staff is recommending approval of this. It does come with the city working with the Parks Department as the applicant, and the Planning Commission also.
Would you please read those out loud, because the public doesn't always go in and look at the packet?
Sure. The area does have a future land use of open space, and so that does allow for the types of recreational activities that would happen on the property. The proposed development in the area is consistent with this planned development. It does have mixed uses, but it's largely recreational. As the document of the PD indicates, any of those other type of commercial uses have to be basically secondary and accessory to the recreational uses out there.
Like what?
Well, the small store, for example, can basically serve the recreational needs out there, but someone couldn't go in and put in a Walmart, for example. So it has to be related to those recreational uses, like things that you would typically find with an RV park or
Could
boat
someone put a
rentals.
liquor store there?
Well, liquor store is a little different because there's also alcohol rules, so we'd have to look because there are some separations from you can't have a liquor store within a certain distance of residential. I'm not sure how this area lays out in relation to that. As far as the PD is concerned, I think you could, again, if it was small scale and oriented to the recreational users out there.
But you could sell bait, for example.
Right, right. And I think the idea is that it would be small scale, commercial that could reasonably be assumed to be accessory or secondary to those principal recreational uses. And some of those are really on a case-by-case basis. We see no anticipated permanent effects on the environment. The current uses are reflective of the commercial and recreational activities that are already out there, and it is compatible with the surrounding park uses. As I said, we've worked with the Parks Department to ensure not only is this consistent with the lease, but also with the things that Parks has envisioned for that area.
Would it allow someone to hire a band and put on a concert with this change?
Well, that's a good question. As you may have noticed in the language, one of the things that was requested by one of the potential leaseholders in that area is to allow for a performance stage. So the short answer is yes, this would allow that. I think that's come up as a question. Is that something we would like to see out there? One option for you to consider is you could take that out of the plan development, and any future performance type things could be done through a special event permit. That would be for a one-time, each time would be a one-time consideration from the council, and you could approve any conditions at that time that you wanted. But again, as this is currently worded, a performance stage as for a concert venue would be allowed under this PD unless you strike that provision.
So the single-family residents that are right there might have a problem with a lot of people coming in for a concert, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, we've heard some recent concerns raised about that particular issue. That performance stage item in the plan development was requested by one of the potential leaseholders who would like to do that in that area. But again, that's really up to you all, either in terms of allowing it or not allowing it in the plan development. It's not currently, as I understand it, allowed under the lease, so you would also have an opportunity there in future leases to either allow or disallow it. And as I mentioned, a special event permit could allow it or disallow it.
So there's two issues. There's one in terms of is the rezoning, but then there's also language in the lease. Does the lease document support this rezoning document? What are the differences between the two that would be quite confusing?
Everything that's happening now under the leases would be allowed under the plan development. That was part of the idea of bringing this forward to make sure those were compatible.
John, performance stage is currently allowed under the lease, is that?
No, everything that's allowed in the lease would be allowed under the plan development. There are additional things like the performance stage that would be additional to that.
Mayor, I think you're right. I think there'd be some problems out there. I know we had some issues this summer, so
Right.
I think
Okay.
that's something we need to think about.
All right.
And I
Yes.
I have a copy of the lease that I can read you right now what the allowed uses are, and those are operating marina, bait stand, general food supply type store, including the sale of beer is allowed by law, camper hookup facilities and park area, and uses incidental thereto. Now, when I look at this, it's that incidental thereto language that gives me pause. That's where there's room to argue that, some sort of performance might be allowed or might not be allowed. I'd also like to point out that though we own the property today, zoning will extend beyond any lease. So if at some point in time we decide to sell to the property owner, that zoning provision will still be in place and we won't have the same ability to control it. We did have a concert that wanted to go out there this past summer, and they did not go through the special events process. But even if they had, there were some concerns that were expressed by the police department particularly regarding, one, noise, two, limited parking, and also access for emergency vehicles out there. So I guess it would be my preference that we allow those kind of events to happen out there through the special events process so that everybody can clearly look at what's proposed and then offer suggestions on how to make it safe for the public.
So what you're saying to us is based off of this, the language in the rezoning document and the language in the lease would make it clear that without a special events permit, no concert could be held. Is that correct?
Well, there wouldn't be a venue developed for a concert. So any concert would have to come through us for some other kind of approval.
And are the single-family residents aware that, for example, a beer store would be allowed to be opened out there? Or is it currently allowed out? I mean, or is there one already in business in this area?
I don't believe there's one currently. Carl's nodding no,
But this would allow one.
the lease allows
I think
that.
they sell beer in the little store there.
There's a little
yes.
store right there.
I think, and it's been a long time since I've been in there, but I think at one time they sold beer in the, yeah. Just this morning before I came to
Tommy,
council meeting.
yeah, go ahead. We're not sure we believe you, but go ahead.
Let me
Yeah.
throw 8 disclaimers out. It's been a long time
Long
since
time.
yesterday.
Yeah.
You remember?
Yeah, the last time I remember,
Yeah.
they sold beer in that small store there, so.
Okay. Continue.
I skipped ahead to, okay, here we go. So we did send out our notifications to the surrounding property owners. You can see here that it's far enough away that it didn't quite touch the homeowners. So those homeowners adjacent did not get a notification because they're outside the 200-foot notification area. But
Wouldn't we be concerned that they would be concerned?
we might, again, with just to step back a little bit of history, in the past, we have tried to identify areas like that where we thought there might be some concerned neighbors, and so we over-notified. We notified people that weren't legally required to be notified. It was a previous council, but a previous council gave us direction, no, we don't want you deciding who should and shouldn't get notices. You should just be sending out notices to those legally required to get notices. And so since that time, that's what we've done. That's been our direction.
Wouldn't we be concerned, just thinking that some of this is owned by one person but leased to somebody else, so the notification isn't going to the person who's actually owning the property, or maybe it went to the person who owns it but doesn't live there? Is there any confusion or concern about that area? Owned versus leased versus rented versus whatever? Rick, you want to say something?
Well, I was just saying, usually, we send out to property owners, and it's, they can lease, but typically, we're concerned about affecting land values, those kind of things, and the property owner is the one usually. But normally, we don't notify renters of a property.
And again, in the past, we have done that in a couple of cases where a particular rezoning was affecting an apartment complex, for example, and we attempted to notify not only the owner of the apartment complex, but individual, apartment renters. But again, our direction for the last couple of years has been only notify those who are legally required to get notification, so that there's no, picking and choosing on our, and that's something obviously you all could give us different direction, but right now our policy is to only notify those property owners legally required to get notice.
Okay.
As I mentioned, staff does recommend approval of the rezoning to plan development, as did the Planning Commission. There are 7 conditions of approval. Site plan would be required for any future development. This is the list of those accessory uses, and you can see those there: retail, sales and service, parking, offices, caretakers' quarters, restrooms, shower and laundry, guest amenities, recreational rentals, sewer stations, fuel sales, waste and recycling station, trailer storage, and then the stage. I think that's the one that was in question earlier. And based on the discussion and the city attorney's recommendation, probably the best thing for the PD is just to simply eliminate that from the ordinance. Then you can deal with stage and performance events through that special event permit. But that would need to be a part of the motion if that's your direction. There is a requirement that any campground RV park must be at least 200 feet from residential properties. So we did try to address the potential concerns of those neighbors. Right now, the RV park is well more than 200 feet from those homes.
Is
But
there a fence that divides the RV park from the residential properties?
I don't believe the RV park has a fence. Trying to
There's a
remember
small
some of
green-
those.
Small green space there that.
Right, there's green space and there's some trees.
Trees.
Some of the homes may have privacy fences themselves, I'm not sure, but there's no requirement, and at least as this is worded, there would be no requirement. But again, with the 200-foot separation, we typically wouldn't have any sort of fencing or screening. But this PD was written in a way that it could be expanded in the future. So if we know there's some interest in expanding the RV park, this is in there to ensure that if the RV park does expand in the future, they will still maintain at least 200 feet from those residences. This indicates that Camper Road, which is the primary access to the area, would be maintained by the city unless that's amended under the lease. So we basically defer it to the lease requirements. If through the lease you want to pass that obligation to maintain that road onto the lessee, then you would have the ability to do that in the future. The existing improvements would be maintained in the current condition. New improvements must comply with ordinance development standards at that time. Basically, what that means is the current layout of the RV park does not meet our current RV park standards. That'll be allowed to stay as is. If they expand the park.
What is the difference?
The streets are too narrow. The spaces for the RVs don't have the space that we would require today in terms of width and depth. The roads aren't paved. Our current RV park standards require that the roads be paved. And so any expansion of the park in the future would have to meet all of those type of standards. But they wouldn't have to basically go back and upgrade the existing part of the park. Because this is a unique area and signage doesn't necessarily meet the requirements of our sign ordinance, we put in a provision that would allow them to create a signage plan that could be reviewed and approved without having to go through variances and other processes through the boards or commissions. The maximum stay provisions, no more than 6 months within a 12-month period, no permanent living allowed in the RV park except for the on-site manager. 15% of the spaces would be exempt from that time restraint. But relocating from one space to another doesn't count for restarting your time. You actually would have to leave
Who enforces
the
that?
park. Actually, I'm not sure. I think it would fall to code enforcement if we received complaints about
How would
someone
they
being
know?
there too long.
I mean, it's
I
like,
believe our RV park ordinance requires the manager of an RV park to keep a log of when a new RV comes in, when they leave, and so we have the ability to inspect that log. If they're not keeping that log, then we could pursue enforcement action against the RV park
when was
manager.
the last time we checked that log?
Really don't check it. We usually do, it goes on a complaint basis. So I recall it happening one time years ago when we were having a lot of oil tenants that were thinking they might be staying there longer than the allowed time. So at that time, we sent in to look. So really, it's not something we check on a regular basis unless we receive complaints.
That's kind of the overview of the conditions. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
Tommy, I'm going to let you start with your questions.
Sure. Well, I think most of them, I think the way to deal with this performance stage issue is, as the city attorney suggested, through special events permit, because it also occurs to me that there could be some other things out there that might not necessarily be music related, but could be rather large gatherings of people that would generate the same amount of traffic, and concerns that the police department had during the summer when they were thinking of having a performance out there. So I think I'm going to support removal of the performance stage, striking that entirely, and then having that dealt with through a special events permit. John, I was looking. Go back one slide, maybe. Created a. Oh, it was the 200 feet. So talk through that one more time. They're going to have to maintain the 200-foot separation from the folks that live over on Sleepy Hollow there, which is that.
Correct. So no part of the campground or RV park could get any closer than 200 feet to those homes.
Okay, and then is there requirements that we currently have that they would have to do right up to that 200 feet in terms of any kind of separation barrier?
Not that I'm aware of,
Okay,
no.
okay. Anywhere else when we have the 200-foot barrier that we need to consider here?
Generally, when there's commercial zoning right next to residential, there is a requirement to screen from the residential. Again, in this case, because normally we don't have the 200-foot buffer, and so in this case, we believed that the 200-foot buffer was sufficient to serve that purpose. Normally, we would only require that type of screening or fencing where the commercial use directly abuts the homes.
Do we know who controls that? Does the city control that green space? Is that something that we control, or does the lessee, is that part of his?
Well,
do we know?
I believe we control that. Go back to that map. I believe the lease area, I think it's this little black line you can see here, and then roughly parallel with that zoning. And so the whole area is owned by the city. And so this area in here is kind of the green space. That would be controlled by the city. Now, that could always be expanded to be included in the lease area, but ultimately we would have control either as the property owner or control over the lease itself.
I was going to say, as long as we control that doesn't create as much concern for me. That way, they're not going to be intruding into that green space area unless we specifically allow it. So for right now, Mayor, that's the only questions that I have.
Tom, did you have any questions for John on this? Harry?
No.
Lucy? And Lane? All right, Tommy, would you like to make the motion then?
Yes, ma'am. I'll make a motion that we approve as presented with the specific striking of the performance stage, and that any events out there be dealt with through the special events permit process.
Second.
And Harry seconds that. Do we have any public comment?
Steve Hampton, I have a question. You asked about the people 200 feet away, but that lake has quite an active HOA organization out there that we are going to be negotiating with soon, it looks like. And I think they ought to be involved since this is all part of their property, their area. And this is all leased property, is it not?
John, you want to come up and answer questions?
Yes, as I mentioned, the lease area is roughly something like that. Then there's some other lease activities like the boat rentals that happen somewhere over here. But yes, it's all owned by the city, and most of the area within the PD is subject to a lease.
Which basically means, even though we're trying to match up what currently happens with this rezoning, the activities as they have been there.
Yes, and they're building a sizable operation on property that's not theirs. How long is the lease?
And what do you mean a sizable?
Well, they keep adding, and I just it seems to me like they're growing a large operation, and it seems like the value of the property should be increasing, and and those kind of things.
John, is there anything in the lease that prohibits or controls the amount of, quote, permanent buildings that are added to this property? Or are we aware, because obviously if they were building a building, they would have to go through the permits department to do anything to it, so you would have to be aware of any, quote, adding on or substantial increasing in the square footage.
Right, and I'm not familiar enough with the lease to know if there's any limit on the number of permanent buildings, but you're right, they would need to get permits, and we would check those kinds of things. I would guess that the lease does not limit permanent buildings, but I don't know that.
Mayor,
Yes, Tommy?
We're not
Oh.
dealing with the lease, we're only dealing with the zoning change. Is that correct?
I think that's right, the zoning. The
Right.
the proprietor out there, the lessee does have, I went out there and talked to him at some length this summer. He does have a desire to expand his use for his RV process, leasing and so forth. To my knowledge, he may have different plans, but he did not mention any permanent structures that he was going to be building out there. It was just the recreational vehicle use expansion.
And if I could add one thing on that, we purposefully drew these boundaries as we did, not to include that expansion area where they want to expand. It would be out in this direction.
That is correct.
They would have to come back to you to get an amendment to this plan development to
Yes.
expand into that area in any case.
Yes.
Teresa, did you want to add something to that conversation?
Yes, there is a provision in the lease that does require permission of Parks Director for any construction on the property. So but then all those buildings become ours at the end of the lease.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any further public comment? We're going to take a,
The lease expires October 31st, 2035.
any further public comment? With no further public comment, we will take a vote. All in support of the item A, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? With none opposed, item A passes 6-0. Item B, first reading and public hearing of an ordinance amending Chapter 11, Article 11.03 of the San Angelo Code of Ordinances, including adopting stormwater quality provisions. And we have Shannon here this morning. Good morning.
Hello. As you mentioned, today we're doing the first reading of a proposed stormwater quality ordinance. This basically, the proposal of this ordinance gets us up to compliance with current permit requirements through the federal and state governments. Per state and federal regulations, all traditional, you'll hear me say MS4s. I'm going to explain that right quick. It's municipal separate storm sewer system. So essentially that means stormwater drains, and a big majority of our stormwater drains are actually our curb and gutter, our streets. So all municipal separate storm sewer systems are required to implement ordinances or legal authority to address illicit discharges and other stormwater related discharges. As I mentioned, our current stormwater quality ordinances do not address illicit discharges. There's nothing implementing for spill response and other non-stormwater related discharges. Our proposed ordinance is the bare minimum requirements that the state and federal government require us to implement and our legal authority, with one exception that will be later explained. First off, it's good to understand what an illicit discharge is. It's a discharge that essentially is not comprised solely of stormwater. Illicit discharges often happen during non-rain events, which is kind of a little bit confusing when you implement that in your stormwater regulation, but that is a requirement. So a lot of times, for example, this picture here is a fuel spill that recently happened along the Red Arroyo, and we had to implement some BMPs, best management practices, to prevent stormwater quality issues downstream because of this fuel spill. There are certain authorized discharges that are authorized through state and federal permits, and there are some non-incidental discharges such as car washing and things like that that are excluded from this regulation. During this process, we first introduced the kind of a big, thick document to address all these discharges at a development task force meeting. In that development task force meeting, we requested stakeholders and people of interest to join a subcommittee to help us develop an ordinance that not only meets what the city is required to do, but also doesn't overreach on the regulatory side. The subcommittee was comprised of a lot of environmental experts, water quality experts, developers, and engineers. We held 8 subcommittee meetings from May until November. During those meetings, we addressed 50 subcommittee comments and basically started whittling away at the large document that was first presented at the Development Task Force meeting. During that time, we removed several industry-specific standards, such as pesticides, used oil, things like that, industrial regulation. And then we had a final proposal meeting at last week's Development Task Force meeting with the same group of people. So I'm going to go over an overview of kind of what the additions are and what the modifications were that we came to the final agreement with. The general prohibition section allows the city to respond and address to illicit discharges. As previously mentioned, that fuel spill was an illicit discharge, it was a spill. This regulation is applicable not only to industrial facilities, but commercial businesses, the general public, and construction activities. This allows the city to inspect and remediate discharges and then offers us the ability to have an enforcement process if we have a difficult time reaching compliance with those dischargers. The illicit discharge section allows the city to respond and address hazardous spills. This one is a big one that we've been recently impacted by in the last year. I'd like to mention that last year the city's departments spent over $8,000 in responding to spills that were not the city's fault, that we had to do something to protect our asset, which is our streets. This requires that those people that do that discharge basically clean up after themselves and they properly remediate the issues so that there's no potential contamination to surface waters or groundwaters. This also allows the reimbursement of city expenses if we do respond to spills, which we don't have currently. And then finally, compliance options. The construction section, which already exists, was just modified to basically get a lot of terminology out of the way and offer one little extra side that does exceed state federal regulation, which is less than an acre sites. Basically, we included them on ours to just meet the same requirements that those that are over an acre are required to do as far as controlling the sediment from their site. This also allows the citation of subcontractors for stormwater violations. This was actually proposed by the committee members, the development community, because a lot of times we go out and right now we're only able to cite the primary operator of the site rather than a subcontractor that may have caused the issue. And then finally, it removes the requirement for the submittal of your stormwater pollution prevention plan, which is what that SWIP is, during the development process. We realized that that was really a necessary requirement that they do that because essentially we use that pollution prevention plan out in the field. And we make sure that whatever's out in the field is whatever's written down on that plan. So that was an unnecessary requirement for the development community. And in conclusion, we're recommending that this ordinance be approved as is, as we are just solely doing the bare minimum requirements to get us up to state and federal compliance. Thank you.
Start with Lane. Do you have questions, Lane?
I do, and I see some of the committee members here that were involved in this. I want to know, mostly pertaining to these small construction sites, the effectiveness of it. Is it going to really make a difference compared to the cost analysis of what you're implementing?
So if you're over an acre, which the majority of our construction activities are over an acre, which means regardless of what the city implements, there's state and federal regulation that requires them to do this, this, and this. For under an acre, the only thing that we're requiring is that erosion control measures be put on site. And essentially, yes, that is very effective because if we don't, it's unfair because you're not being across the board for construction activities. B, if we don't require them to do that and a discharge occurs and it's quite a bit of you could get quite a bit of sediment runoff from less than an acre construction site. The city would be tasked with maintaining that and ensuring that that gets cleaned.
So my second question is, how small of a construction project? Are you considering a small construction project a new home build on a quarter acre, or is that also including an addition to an existing property?
Well, there's different definitions, so just stop me if I get a little off key. Construction is soil disturbance activity. So if you have a 1 acre lot, but you're only disturbing a quarter of that for your deal, that's the construction site activity. Now, for your example, it depends. And the reason being is because if you have a subdivision that exceeds an acre, it's part of a common plan of development. And a common plan of development essentially means that there's lots of construction-related activity going on in one central location. And as long as they're within a quarter of a mile of each other, they're all included in that one plan.
So if a homeowner wants to add on to their existing home, just a small addition, and you deem soil disturbance on concrete work, is that going to deem them to have to put a skirting around their property?
Essentially, there are so many cost-effective measures for erosion control. A lot of times with something like that, as long as they have a lawn established or some sort of landscaping, there's no need for them to put up a silt fence. So there are lots of different options for situations like that. And honestly, we wouldn't be aware of that situation for the most part because most of those smaller acreage construction sites are based on complaints, and the homeowner ones at least.
You have a section in here for enforcement and penalties. That would be going mostly on to our code enforcement team, or would that go enforcement through stormwater?
Is this for construction?
Anything.
For anything?
Yeah.
That would all go through stormwater, and we'll set up those standard operating procedures and provisions that will be provided in the next reading.
Okay. That's all I have for the moment.
Lucy, do you have questions or comments?
Not at this time, ma'am.
Harry?
Just real quick, Shannon, 2020, we're going to take the official census, which will put us over 100,000. There will be some differences in stormwater reporting and other issues after that. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. So 2020 is when the current census comes out, but our permit actually renews this December. And so since it renews this December in 2018, we're actually not required to implement those population requirements until the next permit term, which would be 5 years from 2018.
Okay. Thank you.
Tom?
Absolutely.
Shannon, what I'm hearing is we're concerned about getting up to a minimum standard that even the state imposes. What are some of those instances where there's a spill that we would have to go clean up that's not our responsibility? I mean, give me some examples.
Absolutely.
Of that,
we have several real-life examples, and I'm going to flip back to that picture just to give you a visual. This one, for example, was one that we had to respond to, and I'd like to implement that, or I'd like to mention that our fire department plays a huge role in that spill response. We've gotten to where initially we let them handle it, but as we started auditing our stormwater management plan and kind of seeing what we were required to do, we learned that we really needed to be keeping track of those things and finding different ways to basically to prevent that, mitigate that issue. So this discharge happened at a gas station along the Red Arroyo. The gas station attendant had no idea what she needed to do to fix that situation. We were made aware of it. The fire department responded, and then we deployed our operations folks to come out there and essentially clean it up, mitigate it to where it doesn't get to the surface waters. Another example was a grease spill that happened at a restaurant that got into the city streets. It not only caused an issue with stormwater quality, or the propensity to, but it also caused public safety. So these types of spills and situations are also public safety and health concerns as well. And so in that example, we had to deploy sand trucks because at the time that was all we had. That's the cheapest thing. It's not the most viable, it's not the best measure, which is another reason why we want to have these, so that all that money that we spend on that, we're able to get that money back, because in those two examples we weren't.
So where I'm going with this, what happens to these people that clean off their parking lots and use a power washer?
Right, so there are some essentially allowable discharges. Depending on what it's mixed with is what causes the issue. So a lot of people, as long as they're just power washing their parking lots with a power washer that's got water in it, there's not going to be an issue with that, because you just can't. That's just like vehicle washing, normal vehicle washing. That's something that's not going to be deemed a compliance issue. What our problems are whenever they take a detergent and they power wash with some type of detergent. They also use really, really hot water to do that. It's right next to the river, and it directly discharges in the river. That's where the fear is. So just normal cosmetic cleaning that's not mixed with detergents would not be an issue.
Steve?
One last question. This is bringing us up to the minimum, state and federal.
Yes, sir.
What if we don't do that? What if we say, nah, we're not going to do this?
So, that question has come up, because for 8 years we should have had these ordinances, and for 8 years we've not had an issue with it, other than all the money we've spent not being reimbursed for our response. And B, the state has a pretty hefty fine of $37,500 a day per violation. So if it ever got to that point, that's what the outcome would be. And and essentially, I wasn't here 10 years ago, but the way enforcement and permit compliance works is, even if 12 years ago we got a violation that sent us to enforcement, if we were to get a violation that also kind of commingled 10 years later around the same kind of violation, then that would be a heftier fine.
Yes, Tom?
Shannon, my last question. Tell me about like a fuel spill from a car accident.
Fuel spills from car accidents are those little discharges that we're not too concerned about. Now, that being said, the fire department does put absorbent out to get that absorbent on. The absorbent they use attracts those hydrocarbons, and basically they sweep it up, clean it up, and it's not an issue.
Okay. Good.
All right, so my questions. So number one, how often do we sweep the streets?
We sweep the streets quarterly by district.
And you read through this document, you read a lot of very heavy-handed bureaucratic demands, including, when I drove from my home over here today, and I looked at what was in the streets, and I'm going, seems to me like we needed a street sweeper out here 6 weeks ago. So if the city is not taking care of the streets and sweeping them on a regular basis, I would think the city would be mostly at fault for not taking care of the streets, because there's a lot of trash in the streets.
Well, a lot of the trash comes from everybody. I mean, it's not just the city. There's, municipal solid waste, people throwing their cups outside, people blowing their grass clippings into the curb and gutter. Everybody plays a role in that. And I'm not taking responsibility away from our street sweeping program. We have 6 street sweepers. On average, 4 of them are working at the same time. We have a program, but those operations guys are often redirected to do other tasks. And sometimes we have that schedule in place, but sometimes we can't stick to it completely. It would be nice if we had the staff dedicated just to street sweeping, but unfortunately, they're spread thin just like every other department.
But that's really my concern, is here we are being incredibly heavy-handed, regardless of who's making us be heavy-handed. But I would also say for 10 years, we obviously were not concerned about this document, and the legalities that the state and the federal government have insisted that we be no concerns, I guess, until today. So what we're saying is that for 8 years, we haven't been concerned about large fees having an impact on us, because we haven't chosen to do and acknowledge what the state and the federal government has required. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So why now?
Well, we did an audit on our program, and whenever you do whenever a permit renewal is about to occur, it's very, very common that your regional office come and do a full-on audit on the last 3 years of your permit term. At that time, it would have been evident that we did not have these measures in place.
So one could say that the only thing that you're really concerned about is, number one, getting the money back that we spend on these illicit discharges. Because that's what we keep talking about, is the great cost that the city has, whether it's to the fire department or whichever departments. Our greatest concern is that we are spending our money to clean up these illicit discharges, and we have no way to recoup that money. Is that correct?
I would not say that. I would say my greatest concern is the public health concern of stormwater and illicit discharges. And that's could be my opinion, but I feel like that's everybody that's behind me that's gotten this up. Also of note, the importance of following and leading by example in cleaning up those and not turning a blind eye, because I don't know what happened 3 years ago when a spill would occur. I don't know if we kept track of it. I wasn't there to do that. But that's not the number one concern. The number one.
That's what I keep hearing.
I understand, but I felt like that
I'm
was
just repeating what I hear.
Right, and that was an important measure for everybody to understand that it is costing the city money and we don't get that accounted for. But my number one concern is the public health and safety concern.
So how do we know when one of these, this one obviously you know because of gas station either reported it or somebody else reported it?
I believe a citizen reported it.
And so in many of these cases, when you show examples like this, how do you go find the person who created the spill? If part of this is to recoup the money that we spend to clean this up, how do we go find the person who spilled it?
Well, initially the fire department is usually notified and they respond. Chief Sanford calls me and I myself go out there, or I send someone from Stormwater to go out there and gather information of what happened. In this case, it was a malfunctioning cap on their petroleum storage tanks. We contacted TCEQ because it did create a sheen on the water. They handled the compliance from the petroleum storage tank side, and we handled the cleanup from the MS4 side.
So we're asking to put more regulation on the less than 1 acre site than the government requires.
Yes,
Why?
ma'am, and that's why I addressed that with Lane, is that the erosion control, the erosion that comes off those properties still impacts our MS4. And so therefore, we would ask them to control their site, because if they don't, then city resources are having to be implemented to clean up after them.
So we're not, for 8 years, we haven't been concerned about the state or federal regulations, but now we're concerned about state and federal regulations, so much so that we're going to put our own regulations on a 1 acre site.
I feel like the 1 acre site is a really small, it's a really, really small group that we respond to, or that we do. It's important to understand that we're not asking them to do what the state and federal government require those 1 acre or more to do, which means develop a stormwater pollution plan, do inspections, actually even be inspected by the city to make sure they're doing those things. All we're asking is that their site is contained so that that sediment doesn't, minimal sediment leaves the site. Essentially just control the site. Now, I've offered some examples to some other people about what those erosion control measures are, but that can be as small as just using existing vegetation to prevent that sediment from leaving the site.
So you just made a comment, want to question, you said that you're not requiring that they do what the state or federal requires. How do you choose to do that? Not decide which ones to follow,
Well,
that the state or the federal
the
government
state and the
puts out
federal
there?
government only regulate 1 acre or more. So it's up to the municipality if they feel necessary to implement some type of measure for those sites that are under an acre. And so our recommendation is to offer those sites to at least implement erosion control to prevent sediment from leaving the site.
You know, in reading through this document, a very heavy-handed document that is a document that I think probably has little ability to be managed because it requires the public to manage it, because we don't have the staff to do it. So there's ordinances here that require a tremendous amount of oversight with few people to do it. So I'm saying this half-heartedly, but, you know, we haven't included in there all the people who walk their dogs who discharge.
Right, you're exactly right, and that's why in our parks that we have those bags. That's part of our stormwater management plan, is having those bags there and waste receptacles for that situation. Now, you're exactly right that, you know, it would be so nice to not have to implement ordinances like this, because that would mean everybody just had the mindset to be like, oh, I should throw my trash in the trash can, or I should pick up my dog's waste. But unfortunately, that's not the reality. It's a beast that can never be fully addressed, but this is the minimum of what we're trying to do, the bare minimum to address what we can to assist that and get our stormwater quality levels back up.
Our stormwater quality levels back up, so where are they and where should they be, and why have they deteriorated?
Currently, I believe, so they put these reports out every couple of years. They're not fully approved for several years because they have to go through EPA. Currently, we do have an impaired section of the river for dissolved oxygen. Dissolved oxygen is a direct result of too many nutrients, and that's fertilizers, chemicals, degrading trash, degrading yard waste, all those types of things.
So when it rains, all the fertilizers we've put on our lawns rush down into Sulphur Draw or Concho River.
Correct, if they're not applied correctly according to the label specs.
So how do you ever envision controlling that? I mean, really, we're getting so heavy-handed. Mm-hmm. It is government at its worst, the bureaucracy at its worst, and yet we have no ability to control 99% of what happens when it happens. And so I'm just saying, we put these ordinances out there with no ability to enforce them. You couldn't hire enough people to enforce this document.
Right, well, we're more looking at the bigger picture, not somebody that's fertilizing their yard, not somebody that has a little tiny oil drip in their car. We're looking at a much bigger picture. Somebody that has 10-gallon paint cans that just throws it out into the curb and gutter. We're looking at that person. We're not looking at someone that applied some fertilizer correctly and watered their lawn and the discharge that comes off of that. A lot of these situations, are not during rain events, so they're highly noticeable. But it's a much larger picture what we're looking at. And another thing that needs to be mentioned that will be presented at the second reading is that we're developing an internal standard operating procedure that actually uses the Code of Federal Regulations benchmark trigger areas for certain contaminants, so that if it's under that trigger area, we're not going to mess with it. If it's over that, then we have the responsibility to respond.
Wait a minute, you just said on the second reading you're going to be adding to this document?
Well, this is an
How can you
internal
do that?
SOP. It's not an addition to the ordinance itself. It's an internal standard operating procedure.
Shouldn't we know about that now before we get to second reading?
The ordinance references all of those provisions she's going to put in the operating procedure. When those were in the original ordinance document, that's when it became that very big document that is hard to understand and has a lot of technical terminology that really isn't necessary in the enforcement end of it. So as we went through these, the last meeting that I went to was of the subcommittee. it was discussed that instead of putting those in here, we would have a separate policy document that kind of outlines for them and for you guys, this is how we're enforcing the provisions that are in this ordinance. So especially if you look through the definitions, you'll see like, here's a reference for non-allowable, non-stormwater discharges. It's 40 CFR 122.26 D2 4B1. We do not want to put that terminology in this ordinance because then you can't really discern what it is we're asking you to do because of all of the regulations from the federal government. So,
And a lot of that terminology was in that initial document that was 98 pages, and it was asked to be removed, and we felt like we found a good common ground. It's also important to understand that in our last meeting, we did say that anything that is regulatory related in our enforcement process will actually have to be passed through council. So that document would have to be have to go through you guys before we could actually enforce it.
Okay, but I go back, how do you, and maybe I misunderstood you, how do you say on second reading we would be adding to the language? You can't be doing that.
we're not adding to this language, we're adopting a separate policy document, and there's no point in adopting a policy document if you guys aren't going to approve the ordinance on first reading. So that was actually my suggestion, to wait and see what happens at this meeting, because if you changed a lot of things, then that policy document might change as well. So we can have the policy document first and pull this back on regular agenda for second reading if you want to do it that way. But it just makes more sense to not develop the policies until we know what you guys are thinking is in terms of the
Well, what I don't
ordinance.
want to do is to pass an Obamacare that says we've got to pass it before you know what's in it concept. I don't really think that would be a correct and appropriate thing to do. So, but again, I'm going to go back to the street sweeper, because what I see is most of the problems with what lands up in the Concho River is what's in our streets. I mean, it is. And so we don't have enough street sweepers or staff to take care of what's in the streets on a regular basis. And so let the wind blow, let the rain fall, we can't get to it. I mean, it's an impossible task. And so I just am going to go back and say again, really heavy-handed. I can't support it. I get where you're going, and I believe the people who, in fact, make the big spills happen should be charged the fees and the cleanup costs associated with it. I don't believe we, the city government, should have to cover those costs and that incredible over accident. I don't believe that. But I really hate heavy-handedness, and I look at it and I go, if there's a number one complaint that I hear from citizens, it's about the stormwater fee. Everybody hates the stormwater fee, and we always get questioned, well, that stormwater fee, what do we use it for? That stormwater fee, I can't believe we have a stormwater. What do we use it for? What are we supposed to be doing with it? And I mean, it's a constant concern in citizens' minds. What is the stormwater fee used for? So when we have a document like this, and I think there's been a lot of good work and a lot of good effort on the city staff's part to come up with a document, the documents that you're presented today. So it is not in criticism of the work and effort that has gone into this to try to create a document, but it's heavy-handed. And I'm probably the only one who's going to vote against it, but I can't support heavy-handed bureaucracy documents when we can't do the work ourselves to control a lot of what goes into managing the quality of our water. And I think Harry has a comment he wants to make.
I have one as well, Mayor.
Okay. Sure.
I'll let you start. Yeah.
Mayor, as far as the heavy-handed, as you mentioned, we do have the laws. We have requirements from the federal government and the state government. A lot of them I hate. I mean, we get a lot of unfunded mandates at times that I'm just like, what the heck is this? And you get so frustrated with that. But I do look at this, and I do know the requirements that the federal and state government have for other cities. They're requiring the same thing of us. You know, we start looking at heavy-handedness. A lot of it is coming from the requirements that the federal government and the state government has. So we're looking at that and making sure that, first of all, health and safety, that we keep our waterways clean, and that's a requirement that we have from the federal and state government. We want that as well. How we look at it, though, as far as the heavy-handedness, there's certain requirements the state and the federal government has, so they're in there. As far as the other part of it, and you mentioned that as far as the street sweeping, that we are, as far as the staffing levels are, there's some positions we just can't hire, so we are stretched a little bit thin. But we do need some help as well. If the street sweepers can't be there as often as we'd love them to be there, we would at least like to be able to keep some of that sediment off our streets to kind of make it easier when the street sweepers do go through there, that they can handle that. If we don't have any type of regulation whatsoever, and we say, you know what, it's okay, the sediment can go in there, then that just makes the situation much worse for us since we don't have the sweepers out there either. But again, just like you, Mayor, I hate the idea of the mandates that we get from the federal and the state government at times, but some of these really are to make sure that we keep our waterways safe. Especially for our citizens. So in this instance, I do feel that we need to have something in place to take care of our citizens, but also to ensure that in the future we don't get slammed with a big fee or big fine because we didn't do our part as required by the state and federal
And I agree. I don't think we ought to be paying $37,000. I agree, but it seems like for 8 or 10 years we haven't worried about it. So I just wonder why on
Well, and like I said, that's
November the 20th, 2018, all of a sudden it's become a big issue.
well, and that's because of the permit renewal, and it not even though this doesn't have anything to do with the permit renewal, it is typical that that the state does an audit on your entire program the last 3 years. And as mentioned, if they do that and we don't have anything in place, then we will be out of compliance.
Harry, you wanted to make a comment a minute ago.
Yes. Probably going to reiterate a little bit of what Daniel just said. There's two concerns. I share the concern that Shannon has about water quality. Everything that we put in the river has got to be cleaned up somewhere before the citizens have it at their tap. So that increases cost. Any kind of that stuff goes in there. So for a period of time before Shannon got here, we were probably not doing as well a job as we could. From my perspective, I want to make sure that we do not spend any additional taxpayers' dollar to make sure that the quality of the water is necessary for each person out there. So I want to make sure that as we go forward with this, that we're able to capture whatever dollars there are out there for those particular discharges that are not that are illegal, illicit, whatever you want to use the word for. But I'm also concerned about the compliance standards, and I can tell you, if we're out of compliance for 30 days, that's $1 million, and that's something I don't think we can afford. So I want to do what's necessary, and I understand we've got contractors in here today to listen to what we're talking about, and I know that Lane, that's what you do, and there's some concern about these small areas. Shannon said, if you've got established vegetation out there, then we're not going to have to make you put those containments out there. So from my perspective, I still think that we really need to make sure that we're protecting the citizens. And so quite honestly, I'm going to have to try to support this.
Lane?
I'm going to have to ask, does the TCEQ in the state, do they have a minimum requirement of the number of times a street sweeper comes in a certain area?
No, sir, we're only required to have a program and basically have a standard operating procedure of how often we do that, how we do it, keep track of all the sediment that we do collect and waste disposal manifests, stuff like that. Okay. But they do not have a minimum requirement because they know that's a beast. I mean, it's across the board cookie cutter standard permit for Dallas, for San Angelo, and for Snyder, so.
Correct. I'm going to have to agree with the mayor. We already have enough coming down from the state level on the mandates that they require. It is a little bit heavy-handed, but we do have to meet those minimum requirements that they've already established from the Fed and the state levels. But it looks like we're going a little bit above and beyond to where it's unmanageable.
The only thing that's exceeding the bare minimum is the less than an acre. That's the only thing in here that's exceeding the bare minimum of what the state and federal governments require.
So the reimbursements, that we're going through, and I'll agree that the city does not have to, or does not need to pay from the taxpayer money to, clean up a spill that's caused by an outsider. If we go through and vote for the bare minimums of what the state and the federal government is saying we have to do, is that included in that?
Yes, that's included in that standard operating procedure, that 40 CFR ... that Teresa mentioned. That's where we're getting our levels, which are established by the federal government,
So I can
or
sup-
EPA.
I can support, because we have to support, it's being told to us
Right.
from above, that we have to do something. Our permit's coming up. We have to meet those bare minimum standards. So it's kind of like our hands tied behind our back for that, but anything above and beyond that, I can't support either.
Lucy, you had a question
Yes,
or comment?
Shannon, the mayor brought up the question about the storm fee, and I just wanted to ask you, can you tell the citizens out there what the stormwater fee is for?
Sure, absolutely. And we have done lots of different public information videos, YouTube videos. We did an article as well that kind of explained what that stormwater fee pays for. The stormwater fee is solely to address stormwater quality. And that's doing stormwater samples after rain events that are a half inch or more. We have samplers all over town. We get those tested, see what's in them. We basically trace source back to something that may have caused a different contaminant level to be a little bit elevated. Usually we can find a solution for it. Also, it pays for your operations crews, so the drain cleanings, mowing of open drains, street sweeping, public education and outreach, materials that we buy for school-age children whenever we do experiments with them to teach them about stormwater quality and how stormwater works. And essentially, it's all focused on stormwater quality.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
What is, just, Tom, go ahead.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
So Shannon, let me ask you this. If we don't do this, we're up to being fined $37,000 a day, right?
Yes, sir, potentially.
Only if they
We can
choose
Only
to,
if only if TCEQ wants to do it.
We can adopt the bare minimums.
Well, it's up to us to choose when and how we enforce it, correct? To the extent.
Technically, yes. I
Okay.
mean, we can develop
I'm
our
good.
own programs and everything, but as far as those benchmark levels that are regulatory standards, we don't want to exceed that. And that's not our goal.
Gotcha. That's all
You know,
that.
again, I want to emphasize the following thing. This is not, and these questions are not aimed at the city staff. This is about the citizens. This is about our community. This is not about the work and effort that you have put into this document. This is truly about the citizens who are listening to this and have to live with these things day in and day out. And we, the council, are responsible to the citizens to make sure that we don't pass heavy-handed bureaucratic policies that are almost impossible to enforce. I understand what your job is. I understand the mission that you have in front of us to protect the city from large fines, et cetera. But I also know that heavy-handed governments tamper down growth and development opportunities. And what I don't want to have happen in this community is to make development so difficult, because I got to tell you, just in the year and a half I've been here, the number of documents, the number of pages of paperwork in terms of ordinances and things that we pass. I mean, if I just moved here and started to do something, I don't know if I'd have enough weeks and months to read through all the documents to make sure I knew what I was doing. And perhaps they're common enough in all markets that it wouldn't be an issue. But our jobs today is to make sure that we have a great city where development is supportive by the council and by the city hall, and not to get into the way, and I say obviously with safety in mind. But we need a city, we need growth, and that does not mean we need growth that is not managed by state and federal regulations. But I don't think we as a city need to be heavy-handed on top of state and federal regulations. They're tough enough as it is, and their mandates are tough enough as it is. With that said, one last question on sweeping the streets. There are obviously a couple times of the year when street sweeping is far more important than other times. One would be when all the leaves are falling, like they are now. how do we schedule the street sweeping relative to climate change? Because there are certain times of the year when obviously, like they are now, leaves are falling on a daily basis. And do we have street sweepers right now planned to go out and do this?
We do, and like I said,
I see Shane nodding his head.
we
So-
do, and our schedule is, essentially what we sweep in different areas of the town, so that at least every street in San Angelo that's a city street gets swept at least once a year, and we do a pretty good job at that. Now, I understand that doesn't seem like a lot because everyone would like to have their neighborhood done every, once or twice a year, 3 times a year, seasonally. But it's such a task to accomplish, and once a year is our goal. And
See,
it's
that's
an
my
accomplishable
point.
goal.
That's exactly my point, is that when the trees stop to drop their leaves like they are now, if you swept my street today, in 2 weeks, I'm going to have more leaves on my street than I do today. So
Exactly.
I know, but see, it goes back to this, we try to do it once a year. Once a year doesn't catch what falls into the streets just by the nature of weather change.
Right.
And so if we're so concerned about the quality of water and what flows from our streets into our waterways, I'm just saying, the streets, and I get it, just bringing reality to this conversation. I think I've said enough already today. You know my point. I don't want to waste everybody's time. Okay, Lane, you're going to make a motion, right?
I'm going to make a motion. I'm going to make a motion to adopt the bare minimums of what the federal and state government is requiring of us, and leave it at that.
Does that mean excluding the 1 acre?
Excluding the 1 acre.
There's a
And
motion, oh, go
1
ahead.
acre and below.
1
Is that-
acre and
Is that
below.
worded correctly?
No, it's below an acre.
Below an acre, so
Yes, sir.
.999
Yeah.
of an acre.
Nine.
999. Yeah.
9.
We already have, we'll see it coming through this next session of how much state regulations are going to come down of the power of the municipalities. I think whatever we can do, those bare minimums. So that's my motion.
Is there a second? I second it. Public comment, please.
Morning, Council. Lance Overstreet, Assistant Director, Water Utilities, and former part of the engineering firm that helped to regulate some of these things. And I would really strongly recommend that you guys reconsider the below 1 acre issue. And the reason why is because there was a very large move once the ordinance was in place to not regulate below 1 acre, to create commercial lots that were at 0.99 acres specifically to circumvent being able to have any stormwater regulation. So we actually had large areas of commercial properties, each one of them in the 0.95 and 0.99 acres, that were specifically divided that way so they would not have to regulate any stormwater. Commercial properties would come in, they would slick everything off to sell these lots, and so we had months and months of empty lots with no vegetation. Every time it rained, huge amounts of soil disturbances were coming off of those streets, and the city could do nothing about it because of the way the regulation was. We also have seen instances where large subdivisions come in, and so if a large subdivision is being developed on a residential side, the developers, because it's a part of a bigger program, have to, for each lot, manage the stormwater. What ends up happening is if you have one lot that doesn't sell, 10 years down the road, everything is developed except for one lot. Someone comes in to develop that lot now. They slick the whole lot off. You have heavy rains. It's now putting sediment into the streets. The lot is less than an acre. All the neighbors in the whole neighborhood are having problems with this sediment going to the neighborhood. And again, the city staff is completely tied in that we can do nothing about it. And so what you end up having is you have one developer who developed 15 years down the road, or one builder who's building 15 years down the road, who doesn't have to have the same regulations that all the ones on the front end have to manage that stormwater. And Mayor mentioned that how are we going to regulate this? Well, because I was a part of the stormwater management program previously, we would get calls for these lots that are being developed that are under an acre by residents who are complaining that all this runoff and all this sediment is taking place, and being able to come in and having nothing that we can do about it, other than maybe, clean this up, ask them to clean it up, but it's all after the fact. What this less than 1 acre does, it actually goes through and gives us the ability to actually manage these situations and also to prevent people from taking advantage of those. And so I would really strongly recommend that you reconsider that. The other thing that we're looking at is we've also seen areas where someone has that 0.99 acre. And so they decide they're going to put in a yard. And so they basically go through, grade the whole thing, have no stormwater controls in. We get a couple of large rains. All that sediment then runs off into the street. And we have seen in every neighborhood of the city instances and calls where this has happened. And again, because we're only regulating the 1 acre, there's nothing really the city staff can do other than ask them to clean it up.
It's not regulated by the state or the federal government.
Exactly. And so this is what is being proposed is because of all of the issues that we have had over the last 8 or 10 years, where people just, by leaving a little 5-foot vegetation strip in the front of their yard, could have prevented all of this problem. So we're not asking them to go through and put up silt fences. We're just asking them to control how that they're grading these sites and what they're doing to help prevent this runoff and off-tracking. The other thing that you guys have probably also seen is small construction sites, say a house, for instance, where someone has been driving around in the mud, and when it rains, they're then tracking all that mud down the street. And I'm sure every house in every development area you have seen that, where there is a mud trail 3 blocks long where a construction site was going on, and it was basically a 1/4 acre house lot. Again, these are things that when citizens have called the city and said, hey, can you guys do something about this? Our hands are tied because all we can do at that point is send out a city crew to sweep the street or go over and ask if they would be compliant to help out in those situations. No regulations in place for the city to really take a stance and help out in this situation. So I would just really consider and ask that the council reconsider that whole idea of not regulating anything below 1 acre, because it's not going to fix the problems that we constantly see as staff that are taking place in complaints by the citizens who are coming in saying, what is our stormwater fees being used for? If we can't fix these things, what's the point?
Thank you.
So.
Further public comment?
Yes, ma'am. Steve Hampton. I also read through that 33 pages. Well, I didn't read through the whole thing, but it put me to squirming in my seat as the mayor had mentioned, and so I feel that it's coming on pretty strong. Also, it was pretty general. Some of it. The fees, and it sounded like it was up to the discretion of the administrator, or well, I think that's a $50 fine instead of a $100 fine, or it didn't seem like there was a standard to make a judgment on, and the generality kind of made me uncomfortable too, and I had it copied off, and I think it was in 11, and there was the C. There was like the second page or so. It had fees and on it, and the number C. It was real general.
I think I know which one you're talking about. It says fees as the administrator may deem necessary to carry out the requirements of the chapter.
It's just so and whose standard is he going to use? So I think. I think Lane was right in doing what he did as far as making the proposal, but I was sympathetic to Lance's overture also, because the city is left defenseless in controlling bad situations. And yet leaves and dirt are organic and are natural occurring situations, and will regularize themselves. How long will rolling waters remain unpure? That's what I'm sure the good Lord meant when he talked about these systems, these water systems cleaning themselves. So anyway, I feel that this needs to be reevaluated, and maybe we could table it somewhat, And I appreciate that it went about trying to get input from the engineers and those who are affected. I think that's very wise and appropriate. But the lower than an acre deal comes, that's affecting me because I might want to put a storage unit and then have all these deals. And she said that the that the harshest standard was on that group, and so it was a little over regulated. So anyway, very good. Thank you.
Morning. Rocky Templin, builder developer. Red tape, I don't even know where to start. We haven't been fined $37,500 a day for 8 years. I do not know the last time that the city was audited. I do believe that our water quality has increased tremendously with what is in effect now through just what TCEQ has done. I was implementing stuff way before the city was. The first time I turned something in, as y'all, my MS4 provider, the city was like, what is this? Tim Wolf was like, we don't know what to do with this. We'll just stick it in a file. So some of us have been doing this long before the city has. I think the city's permit, I'd like to see what its renewal is. I'd like to see what the STOP is, what's going to be the standard operating procedure on how this is enforced. I'd like to know how it would impact large events that are tremendous to the city, as far as the rodeo and the stock show, as far as how it's going to affect them on cleanup and stormwater. You have a lot of animals out there. You have a lot of products that are going to get in the street that are not going to be cleaned up. How it's going to affect that. As far as under an acre, I'm on the fence on that. In the county, I know there is nothing, so I don't think it would affect that, or in the ETJ. Thank you.
Council, Mayor, Gary Cortese. I'm a builder and developer, and I'm also here as a citizen, private citizen. And it's been a good presentation, good feedback back and forth. The term bare minimum's been used over and over and over again. And this is a problem I had, and it's nothing against staff or anything. It was, when we started out with this, it was like, I don't know, 70-plus page document. We thought that was bare minimum. We got it down to whatever it is today, 30-something pages. My question is, how do we fact check that it's bare minimum? Who do we ask besides staff? And that's nothing against staff. They do their job well.
Yeah, they did their job.
And so we talk about these audits. Well, you know, all right. We're all, if we're in business, we're threatened by audits from different regulatory agencies all the time. That's what I would like to know is what are the bare minimums and who puts the seal of approval on it that it's a bare minimum. I presented a bare minimum presentation about what was allowed, and I was turned down here locally and with the regional EPA director, and most of it was because it was not EPA, TCEQ director, and I was turned down. I was flat turned down. And one of the reasons was, well, this is from 2004, and it was from the EPA. That would allow me to do what I wanted to do. And so I thought about it, and I thought, well, you know, do I just let it go or do I take it a step further? Well, I took it a step further. And I got it through to Austin. And Austin came back and said, no, staff and the regional director were wrong. What I was proposing is allowed. Now, there's some caveats in there. The city can step in and add to it, so on and so forth. But we're talking about bare minimums. And what I was proposing was a bare minimum. So we don't have a bare minimum. There's no way in this world that someone can come up here and say that this is a bare minimum. Who knows if it's a bare minimum? This is up to y'all. And this fine situation that keeps on getting thrown out, $37,000 a day, sure they can do that. But they're going to give you a chance to work it out. They just don't come in here and say, hey, you guys are bad guys. $37,000 per day fine. We have a document in place already for the construction industry. It's been in place for a long time. With BMPs, all these famous words, MS4s. We assume that since sediment gets into an MS4 that it automatically goes down to the Concho River. Well, I don't know if Lakeview's sediment gets to the Concho River. How we prove it? You walk along our parks, and we got banks, and I'm sure Rick is working on it for grants, but we have banks of subsidence of soil going right into the river after rain events. More than probably what builders and developers and citizens of San Angelo would ever dump into the river at one time. Our main problem is the way our city's laid out originally. All through here, cities were laid out 100 plus years ago. We drain everything into the river. Our old part of our city structure is what's polluting the most. These other things up here with these cans of gasoline or whatever it was, that's an industrial thing. That's completely separate from what they're proposing today. It is regulated by the TCEQ itself. I guess we have to call them and turn it in. And someone from the TCEQ comes out and handles it. It bypasses us. So, I don't know. Bare minimum. I don't know. Who knows? No one knows. I know for what I proposed is not a bare, they turned that bare minimum down. The staff did. I don't believe this ordinance that we're reading today has been basically germane to what we have in place is germane to a small subset of citizens. What we already have in place, it's been enforced since, I forget what year it is, 2013, 2009, is for germane to a small subset of citizens and mainly developers. Well, we've been complying by it. I've been dealing with it since 1999 through the EPA. What we're proposing today is going to take in all the citizens of San Angelo, every one of them. I guess industrials, but the citizens of the industrial. I don't think there's been enough public notice. Now you call this public notice. I think that on something like this, there needs to be town halls. There needs to be the face of the administrators answering public's questions about what's going to fix to happen to them. That's just my opinion. Now the city attorney will argue with me otherwise, and that's fine. Also, in your district, each of y'all's district, and mayor, you covered all of them, so you may have low to moderate income, you will have low to moderate income constituents. And under the penalty assessments, if one of your constituents is unable to pay for accidental spills, how will the city compel repayment for cleanup? Liens on the property? Citations to municipal court? Citations to municipal court, you don't pay it, you get pulled over in your car for a blinker not working, you're going to jail.
Well, it looked like me, when reading through it, it automatically goes to a utility bill if there's a fee?
No,
okay.
Those do not. We bill those. It's just like a nuisance citation that we would bill them, and if they don't pay, then we would eventually get to lien. But there is a long process that happens before a lien is placed.
But there's a process, and it can happen. And my question is, how's it going to be on the property or citation municipal court? There is a distinct difference between the two. A lien on the property is one thing, but citations that goes to municipal court is another. You could be a blinker not working and there's a warrant for your arrest for dirt in your street. The Stormwater and Engineering Department will be the judge and jury with an appeal allowed to council. Will the citations or the liens on the property be put on hold during this period? That's the question.
Does anybody have an answer?
I'm unclear on what he's referring to, so
Okay,
I don't
so
really have an
clarify
answer
your
for him.
question,
Right,
maybe?
well, code enforcement, for instance, comes out, you didn't mow your yard, it's over 12 inches. By the way, code enforcement is written if one weed is over 12 inches, they can fine you. They don't do it, but that's what it's written. If they come out and say clean up, and you say, no, it's not my sediment, and you go to argue, debating. And the final deal is to, final appeal is to council. That's going to take a long process. During that time, will all the fining or leaning on the property, will it be put on hold while the appeal process is going on? Especially if it's a municipal court citation. You got what? Traffic ticket? 30 days to react?
Teresa, are these things that we need to be answering or addressing or not covered?
I
Tell
think-
us how we need to respond or
I think
ask.
what he's referring to is that the stormwater drainage utility fee, which is already on the books, there's a way to calculate that based on the lot size. And if you disagree with how that's been calculated, that's an appeal to council. All the MS4 requirements we're enacting today, there's no appeal to council on those. Those either will go to citation, but I don't know if we write citations for those. We really just want compliance. And so they will try to gain compliance. If we have to clean it up like those big spills, we do send an invoice. And then at some point, if that invoice is not paid, then we could place a lien on the property. That's the part that's missing. That's one of the parts that's missing right now. All of our other abatement items in the ordinance state that we can place a lien to compel payment over time. The stormwater, if they don't pay, there was no mechanism whatsoever for us to gain payment. So he's talking about two different things. The utility fee is an appeal to council. There won't be a citation for that. It'll be adjusted through the utility department. All of the requirements of the quality requirements we're putting in here that's required by the EPA and the state, those are all through the stormwater division. Those can go to citation, those can go to abatement, and then we can place liens. We won't place a lien for your stormwater utility fee, nor will you get a citation.
Okay.
With all due respect, I wasn't talking about the water bill fee. Y'all pass this, the water bill fee over time will go up. It's going to happen. Like you said, it's heavy-handed. You got to try to get in compliance. The water bill on the stormwater fee on your water bill will go up. It's going to go up anyway.
Yuri, could you talk into the mic a little?
Okay.
I can hear you clearly. I'm just not sure if people in the back
Could y'all
of the
hear me on
room
that last
can.
statement? I was not talking about the fee on your water bill. I was talking about noncompliance, a citation of some sort being written for noncompliance, and the homeowner says, it's not my deal. It's not mine. It's out in the street, it's not mine. So we get into an argument or debate, whatever, and so they say, well, the stormwater director or whoever's going to enforce this says, well, we're going to issue a citation. During that time that we're appealing the citation, will it be set aside until the appeal is heard and ruled on? Or will it automatically go into the municipal court system and it starts ticking? We got to pay this in like a traffic ticket in 30 days.
All right, we got it.
Got it?
Got it.
This is a policing ordinance. The people that will be administrating this, they're hard to get to for the average citizen. I'm still waiting for an email I sent out to 2 weeks ago to a response. This is have a tendency to be heavy-handed through my experience, if an improper appeals process is not in place. Code enforcement started this way. Code enforcement came in the late 90s. I didn't hear of it before it came in. Next thing we know, we have code enforcement. Mow your yard.
Good thing we have that, actually, though. Yeah, people mowing the lawns and stuff, so that's good.
Well, that's it is. Sure, people should mow their yard.
Yuri, I'm gonna. I've allowed you more than
Well,
that's.
one more thing.
Okay.
All
right.
It was a disaster for the public the way the appeals process worked. It has since been amended in the last 2 years, roughly, where there's a due process, where the citizen has the right to appear before a municipal judge and plead their case. The municipal judge decides the guilt or the innocence. The transitory nature of these departments in the last 10 years is interesting to look at. How many directors of all city engineers, city planners, city attorneys have come and gone in the last 10 years?
We really need to keep this discussion to the item.
The municipal court judges have been the same for the last 30 or 40 years. That's it.
Thank you, Gary.
The bare minimum bothers me.
Okay. Further public comment?
My name's Tony Jones. I'm a builder and developer as well, and I'll try to be very brief. I want to commend staff, all of them, for working with us on this document. As always, my concern is, as yours was, Brenda, is the overburden of regulations that are going to continue to cause the rise of homes in San Angelo, Texas. That's my gig. I think that staff worked really hard on this, and I made a statement at one of our meetings that, you know, if I had my way, we would kind of try to change the thinking down here, fourth floor down. And that is to try to figure out how we can clean up our water in this particular situation, how we can clean up our water. Maybe not necessarily make all the bureaucrats elsewhere happy, but nonetheless, at the end of the day, be succeeding at what we're required to do. And I think there are many ways to do that aside from more bureaucracy, more bureaucracy. We just don't. Shannon and her department, in my opinion, do a great job with what little they have, okay? I have no idea how she's gonna do this. The only way she's gonna be able to implement this and take care of this is to come back to you and ask for more money, more money, more money, more money, in response to state and federal requirements, okay? So as someone pointed out, I don't know that we've ever been fined $37,000 a day for anything. Much like Shannon comes to me and tells me I need to clean my mud up out of the street, the state comes to you and says you're out of compliance. They don't take me straight to jail. Shannon doesn't. They won't take the city straight to jail. They'll say get into compliance. And so then we have to go do what we have to do in order to make all these regulatory agencies happy. So I was a little bit concerned about the fact that we're going to present something at the next meeting that we didn't present today. That's part of this. I think an integral part of this, okay? So I was a little bit concerned about that, but you know, at the end of the day, I know we all have to comply with these regulations, but there are many, many different ways to do that without continually raising the cost of regulation. So that's all I have.
Yes, Teresa.
The question of cost has come up throughout these discussions over and over again, and I'd just like to say that for the developers and the cost of a home, these, as they've said, are regulations they've already been having to follow. And my understanding is they've been doing a pretty good job following those. So there should be no increase on the cost of these gentlemen and in the price of a home. Now, the less than an acre, potentially there would be, but it's not going to be, I wouldn't think, very extreme. I mean, if you have a lawn, you're going to meet the requirements. So I asked the question, what impact will this have on the cost of the home? And what I was told was that there shouldn't be one. As far as raising fees, there's only one fee that's involved in this ordinance, and that is for reinspection if there's been if we've shut you down, a stop work order. That's only happened once, I believe. The Stormwater Division works with these folks very well, and it's only happened one time. That's a $75 fee. That's what it was then, and that's what it still is. So there's no increase of fees whatsoever proposed in this. As far as the stormwater fee in general, if we were to increase that, there would be public hearing requirements under the Texas Local Government Code to raise those fees. That's like separate and apart from the quality that we're talking about today. We're not proposing any new fees. No increase in fees. Everything's exactly the same. And if we were to increase those, that would have to come back to you.
So as of today, we're not asking to increase the fees, but that doesn't mean in 2 months that there isn't going to be a request. So, I mean, the question mark is, yeah, not today, but when? And so, I mean, yeah, but I think we all hear in the background down the road there will be, and so that's not really an adequate answer to today is there's no fee today increase. That's only relevant at this moment, this time, this date, this year, period.
There.
So
Mayor?
Yes, Michael?
If I could, in two previous statements you made today, I think you perfectly characterized the challenge associated with that monthly stormwater fee, and that is, can't we do more? Street sweeping, you can fill in the blank there. Can't we do more to be more effective there? That's one side of the argument. The other is nobody likes the fee as high as it is now. And so that challenge, demand for more services and demand to reduce the fee, that is a constant challenge, not just with stormwater, but with everything y'all regulate and manage. How do you keep the fees as low as possible and keep the service as high as possible? That's always going to be a challenge. So you're right.
Yeah.
Inflation and increasing unfunded mandates tend to push that burden up, which would tend to put upward pressure on the fees at a time when we want to reduce the fees.
The problem with, every street once a year, there's how many days in the year? I mean, it's when you put it in perspective, we're creating a scenario that is an impossibility to manage and oversee and keep the cost relevant. I know that's
it is a challenge, and Shane used to be able to quote how many tons of debris those street sweepers picked up every year. I don't know if you've still got that memorized, Shane. But
huge, I'm sure. He shakes his head.
It's huge,
yes.
the amount of debris they pull off the streets. So it is a challenge. It's a valid effort to try to keep those streets clean. But that is the continuing nature of everything you do. How do we offer the service or increase levels of service and manage the fee? There's no magic there.
That goes back to the documents, creating documents that are impossible to manage, control, and implement because of the very thing you're talking about. And so when I say heavy-handed, again, this is not criticism of the staff, and I want the staff to be very clear about this. This is about the reality. You did your job, feel like you put together a document, but what's the ability to manage it? And if we're creating ordinances in these 33 pages or 38 pages of documents we cannot execute or oversee. And what is the bare minimum? What is the bare minimum? Have we defined the bare minimum in these documents? And so there seems to be questions and challenges on that. And I just say, before we go and pass a document that there's still a lot of questions about, it does not mean it won't get passed or shouldn't get passed down the road. But I think we need one more overview of it and make sure, based off the challenges and questions that are out there today, that we've re-looked at it and said, based off of those challenges and questions, we've re-looked at this document and we think those changes would be good changes. Yes, Teresa?
I think there's a couple of things. One, Shannon can answer the question on what is the minimum. That's spelled out for us very clearly in the permit. But two, we also have a balancing act. We have this balance between an easily enforced ordinances to drive down the road, and if there are leaves in your gutter, then you get cited for that because those are your trees and those are your leaves. And that's how some people or some cities regulate these things. To get the fertilizers out of the water, there's a lot of cities that regulate big box retailers who store fertilizer outside and they prohibit it unless it's covered. So we can make this easy to enforce by putting very stringent requirements. Every homeowner is responsible for the grass that goes into the gutter. Every homeowner is responsible for the leaves in the gutter. Every homeowner is responsible for any dirt in their gutter, and every big box is responsible for fertilizer stored outside. We chose to go, and Tony and I had a really good dialogue during the last meeting about our balance was we want St. Angelo to regulate stormwater in the way we see best, which is what he indicated. So having a more bare bones ordinance allows some creativity on the part of the developers and the stormwater folks to be able to talk about these things. I was under the understanding that Mr. Cortiz's issue had actually been resolved after the last meeting. So there was an initial, no, you can't do this, and then they talked about it after the last meeting and they found a way they can make that possible. And that's the ordinance we tried to create. If you want an ordinance that's very easily enforced, just driving down the street, we can do that, but I don't think that kind of regulation anybody wants here.
Well, and I don't think what I'm talking about is getting heavier handed. I mean, the idea is that you reduce the bureaucracy, not increase the bureaucracy in order to get the perfect state. You can't get perfect state. And to pretend that just making this a 98-page document solves the problem doesn't solve the problem. It makes
Right.
it a city that no one wants to live in.
Absolutely. We all agree on that.
If I may, I have one
Yes.
out of 2 cents left.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry I
I
interrupted you.
apologize in advance, Lance.
I apologize for interrupting you.
I apologize in advance, Lane. The 1 acre or less, I think needs to be regulated at the local level because probably at least half of the homes, new homes built in San Angelo, Texas, are built by, one-shot builders or guys that come in and just build one every 6 months. And while I have to comply on the next block, he does not. He creates a mess, and it brings the focus to me, unintended or not. So I'm in favor of that 1 acre or less thing. Thank you very much.
Very good.
Is there any further public comment? Okay. So with no further public comment, we will take a vote on the motion that is on the table, and that is to accept the document as presented, except eliminating the less than 1 acre. With that said, we'll take a vote. All in favor? Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
Motion does not pass. 4 against, and, 4 for, and 2 against. All right, so with that, would somebody like to make another motion?
I would move that we adopt the staff, as the report as presented by staff where it does regulate the less than 1 acre.
And I will second that.
Any public comment on this motion?
You Hampton, I go to Tommy, what are the unintended consequences? I think that's hitting the people again. It takes it off commercial and puts it on private. And so I would ask that you not vote for this, that it might be tabled and reevaluated all the way through. I mentioned fines before, that was never re-evaluated. Also, there's something in there about paying, there's history, people who haven't paid their, it implements fines against people who haven't paid their stormwater. There's not? It seems like I read something about filling in a blank that they had passed over before, but there were a lot of questions in my mind, and I think it ought to be tabled. Thank you.
Further public comment?
Again, Rocky Templin. I would agree. I think it needs to be tabled. I still have a lot of questions that are unanswered even on city enforcement. I know my subdivision, I've tried several times. When it was street and bridge, everything seemed to function pretty well. When stormwater took over street and bridge is when it seemed to decline. Some of my subdivision streets have not been looked at by the city in 10 years. The street sweeper does not come by except for possibly once a year after I make numerous phone calls. The dirt in the street does run down the alley, does run down the streets, and then normally I get a call, and it's my job to clean it up. So it is other people's problems. Every time it rains, the city's alleys run dirt, grass, and debris in the streets, and it normally takes a long time to get that cleaned up. Several intersections, there's been accidents because of this product that gets in the streets, and people pull up to a stop sign to stop and slide through it. The police department has documentation of several of those accidents. Also, when the city gets ready to mow all the arroyos and everything, they cut all that debris and leave it in the arroyo. And so how is that going to get policed? So how am I going to police the city? If Shannon can't police the city and I have complaints, I have no choice but to go to the state. I have to turn the city into the state, turn TCEQ, and then have them come enforce the city. So I think the city needs to police themselves first, and then let's worry about the residents. Thank you.
Further public comment? All right, the motion on the floor is to accept the ordinance, Chapter 11, Article 11.03 as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Those opposed? Nine. It's 3-3. So with that, it does not pass. And so I would like to make a motion to table this item.
Second.
In further public comment? With no further public comment? Or do I have to take a vote on that, Teresa?
Oh, you do need to take a vote. And you also, if you could give us a date specific when you want to table it too, that would be helpful as well.
May I ask staff and the developers in the audience, what kind of time frame? Do you need one more meeting, two more meetings? Daniel, do you have a comment?
Mayor, we have December coming up, and as we're going to talk about the second meeting in December. We likely will not have that meeting in December. I'm not sure we can pull together and do the first meeting in December. Shannon will hear from you. If not, it'll have to be after December.
Who will we be meeting with? We've met 8 times
We
with
have,
the
yeah.
subcommittee. I'm not sure who else we would meet with. Is there somebody in particular you want us to meet with?
Well, it seems like there's questions about things in this ordinance that there's still concerns about. So I don't know if we can take the 5 items that have been brought forward today and just have one more meeting to discuss those very specifically, and then come back the first meeting in December, which would be in 2 weeks. Is that correct?
That's perfectly fine, as long as that works with the committee members' schedules. We can accommodate that, no problem.
Harry?
Just a real quick comment. We had 3 builders in the room. One specifically said that he was in favor of this less than an acre. One talked about trying to see whether or not we could work something out. And Gary, I think, had some other concerns about regulatory things that may have been beyond this ordinance itself. So 1 or 2 more meetings, I would say if we can't vet this in 1 or 2 more meetings, then we're not going to be able to solve everybody's questions. I would say can bring it back in January.
Usually also helpful to staff if they could submit those questions they have specifically in writing. That way they can know up front and get those answers prepared and have those. So if they could provide those to staff, it would help.
Is that, yes?
May I comment?
Yes, you may.
Again,
Microphone, please. Thank you.
Staff has done a wonderful job. It's been pushed back and forth, and, you know, at the end of the day, agree to disagree and remain friends. There is the TCEQ, there is a separate division. I don't recall the name. It's government, small bit. And maybe we could ask them into the discussion to find out if we really are at the bare minimums.
Ken, do you want to comment on that? I'm not sure I know what it is, and we probably don't. None of us know what it is.
I would like to comment on that because I have actually provided this to everyone in the subcommittee meeting regarding the permit term for the permit that we follow, the general permit that the city follows. There's a legal authority, and I've provided it to the mayor. I'll be more than happy to provide it to anyone else who would like to look at it. But it states that traditional small MS4s, that's what the city of San Angelo is. We're a level 3 small MS4. Within 2 years, which this was 2012, I believe, within 2 years, the permit effective date, the permittee shall review and revise, if necessary, its relevant ordinances or other regulatory mechanism, and shall adopt new ordinances or other regulatory mechanisms that provide the permittee with the adequate legal authority to control pollutant discharges into and from its MS4. In order to meet the requirements of this general permit, to be considered adequate, this is our bare minimum. The legal authority must at a minimum address authority to prohibit illicit discharges and illicit connections, authority to respond to and contain other releases, control the discharge of a spill, prohibit dumping or disposal of materials other than stormwater into the MS4, authority to require compliance with conditions in the permittee's ordinances, permits, contracts, or orders, authority to require installation, implementation, and maintenance of control measures, Authority to receive and collect information such as stormwater plans, inspection reports, and other information deemed necessary to assess compliance with the permit from operators of construction sites, new or redeveloped land, and industrial and commercial facilities. Authority as needed to enter and inspect private property, including facilities, equipment, practices, or operations related to stormwater discharges to the small MS4. Authority to respond to noncompliance with BMPs required by the small MS4 consistent with their ordinances or other regulatory mechanisms. Authority to assess penalties, including monetary, civil, or criminal penalties, and the ability to enter into interagency or interlocal agreements or other maintenance agreements as necessary. Thank you.
That answered my question about bringing the other side in, but she just read it down. That's exactly what it says, and it says adequate or other local ordinances. How do we know that in our codes already we're not complying anyway with our other ordinances? We don't know that, and been investigating. But anyway, that's side.
Well, let me ask a question now. I think there was a conversation about our permit that ended 2018, correct? So if I'm not mistaken, then what you're asking is that we have some vote and some ordinance on file before our permit.
December 12th. Yeah.
So what we
December
need
12th
to
at
do,
midnight.
however much it takes, we need to have this represented for council the first meeting in December so that we comply with the deadlines that we have for our permits. So it seems to me there's just a little bit of language in there that we need to work on. Everybody's not going to be happy. We're not going to get an ordinance that's 100%, but we got to get an ordinance that this council can approve by the first meeting in December.
Yes, ma'am.
I think we needed to take a vote on tabling this item. And so do I have a motion and a second? All in favor of tabling this item to the first? Yes.
Mayor, would it be possible that we could approve this on first reading and make the changes for second reading, have it on the regular agenda? Because we've got to have 2 readings to approve it.
So you're asking, again, repeat that, please.
If we did the first reading in December 4th, we wouldn't be able to approve it until the 18th. So if we could approve it on the first reading with the changes or with direction to staff to make changes, then it could be approved on December 4th in time.
So you're just asking that we, when we make a motion and approve it, that we say that there will not be a second reading? Is that what you're requesting?
No, I'm requesting that we withdraw the motion to table it and make a motion to approve it first reading.
You don't have to say approve, you can move it forward to second reading.
Okay, so we're not tabling it, we're just moving it forward to the first meeting in December for a reading.
Mayor, I think what they haven't made clear is the ordinance requires 2 readings.
I know, I got that.
And we have 2 meetings, including today. If we cancel the second meeting in December, the 2 meetings we have before the expiration of the permit is today and the first meeting in December.
But we're not approving it today.
No, it can't be approved today. It has to be approved on 2 readings. A lot of cities don't even have a public hearing on the first reading. They just move it to second, and that's when you argue about it. But
Okay, so we're moving it to the second reading and not
Are we
approved.
sure we're going to have a quorum on the 20th?
well, I mean, that's our concern. We're going to talk about that at the end of this meeting, what we're going to do with that second meeting in December. And so if you table it to the first meeting, there's no way we'll get it approved if you decide to not have the second meeting, or you're tying your hands to require a second meeting without knowing if there's going to be a quorum.
But we can, we're not tabling it, we're just moving it to the first.
Second reading.
To a second
Which would be the
reading
first meeting in
presentation on
December.
on consent agenda, that which we will pull out and have a discussion about.
Absolutely.
Or
And at that
was it be
point-
on the regular agenda?
Oh, no, I would put it on regular,
Yeah.
definitely. And we could also, at that point, also have the policies like we were intending to do. So you would be able to see all of it together.
Which
and
we
see
need
how it
to
works.
anyway.
Which you do, yes.
Okay, that's what we'll do. I can't repeat it again, because I'm sure I'll screw up the
we have to-
language, so I'm
do we
not.
You
have to
just have a
vote on it?
motion to move it forward to second reading, that
Make a
way.
motion to move this forward to second reading.
All in favor? Public comment?
The fact that you've already gone through the process and are working on this in a meaningful way will stand as your to the fact that you're working on it, and there. I mean, I don't think we're going to be out of alignment with the rules. I mean, any further than we already are. So if we made it in January or February, it would still be the same to me in my mind. That we are working on it. That we've heard it once already, and that there are changes, and that we need to work on it and refine it a little more. So the fact that we're doing this, we're in the process, would.
Well, here's the thing, we can move it again if we need to, but for this point, this is what we'll be doing. And if in December, there's still too much confusion, we can continue to move it out till we all get through the process and agree on a document that we can support.
Well, in bureaucracies, a short period of time is not going to be very good. There's too many people involved, so
At this point, it doesn't look like too many people, so I think we can get it done.
All right.
I hope. I'm sure that there's lots of great staff and lots of great input. We can get her done.
We know each other very well by this
We
point.
do. So I think they can work through it and hopefully come to the table with a decision. So thank you, everybody, for your comments and input today. Okay, with that.
We still need to take a vote.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
of course. We'll take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 6-0. With that, we're going to do an update on sales tax revenue performance. Shop local, support local, give local, go local.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Mayor, Council, Mr. Valenzuela. I'm Tina Dearsey, Director of Finance. I have some good news for you this morning. Our sales tax revenue was up again in November at 13.63% compared with the same month in the prior year, and our budget is over by $227,000 year to date. I do want to point out that last November, sales tax was up at 7.03%, so that is compounded slightly this year. And here's your sales tax by industry. We have results for October right now, and so you'll see there that retail and general services are up slightly, as well as professional service, wholesale, and manufacturing. Again, that's for October, reflecting sales in August. Sorry, I keep pushing the wrong direction for some reason. So you asked for annualized information, Mayor, at the last meeting, and so for 2017 compared with 2018, 18 was up 12.11% compared with 2017 at just over $1.4 million.
And I'd like you to keep doing it that way because we know there's a rollover, so we want to have an ongoing where we stand as a rolling number as well as current.
And here's your annualized sales tax by industry information that you requested as well, where you can see the blue line is fiscal year 17 compared with the fiscal year 18.
You know what's really great about that? That's the first time in a while where we've seen retail increase over the previous year. So that's a great positive. Support local, give local, shop local, go local. Go.
Okay. And that's all the information I have on sales tax, unless you have any questions for me.
Thank you, Tina.
I'd just like to say happy birthday.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Thomas, very
Is that
much.
today?
It is.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank
Do
you
you
so
want me to
much.
sing?
She's begging for it.
Start it off,
Please.
Tommy.
Actually.
Happy birthday to you. Happy
No, I was just
birthday
kidding.
to you. Happy birthday, dear Tina. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it.
There you go.
And now you know why we we don't have a barbershop quartet.
Exactly. All right, item D is first public hearing and introduction of an ordinance amending the budget for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2018, and ending September 30, 2019 for capital items, grants, and reimbursed expenses. Tina?
Yes, ma'am. So this is a budget amendment that we're bringing to you today. The first three items are new items. We have one for the fire training, for the fire training center, where they're having those external training courses that provide to external departments and agencies. And so Chief Dunn already has revenue, I believe, in the amount of about $15,000 that he would like to budget for that revenue, as well as any additional revenue he would expect to receive this year, and thereby paying for the expenses associated with those training classes that he's putting on out there. That's for $45,000 in both revenue and expense. We also have the TxDOT ramp grant, and that's out at the airport. And I'll tell you what ramp is, if I can find the routine airport maintenance program. That's a grant that we can receive where we have a local match of $50,000, and they'll grant us $50,000, and it's meant to increase the amount of improvements we're able to do on an ongoing basis at the airport.
Usually our grants, 25% match? This one's a 50-50 match?
We haven't gotten this one in a while, so kudos to Mitch for applying for it. This is going to stretch his small pool of maintenance dollars, so good job, Mitch. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch.
And Michael, I'm not sure, are you aware of why it's a 50% match rather than 25%, as she pointed out?
Tina, no hard questions, please. That's just, this is a TxDOT grant program, and that's just, they just want that level of match.
But I do,
Ask and you shall receive.
Yeah, there you go.
I do want to mention that even without TxDOT support, these are projects that need to be done anyway. Maintenance-wise, they would have been doing and paying out of pocket anyway. So
Right. This is
to
a
get a
good way to
50% coverage, that's awesome.
Yeah. Okay, oops. I don't know how to work this remote.
That's why I don't do visuals.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep my hand on this button. Okay, and then this third one is a Homeland Security grant, and that is for communication and trailer and vehicle and a satellite and radio equipment out at the EOC, I believe. Chief Sanford has turned in this request. And that's in the amount of $67,538 for that grant.
So that nets out zero, and there's no contribution on our part.
Yes, ma'am. And next up, we have a list of what we call our carryover budget amendments, and these are projects that had some form of approval in FY18, but for some reason we didn't have a PO on them yet, or we hadn't begun the project per se. And so our departments will turn in what's called a carryover request and ask to carry those funds over into the new year so that they can complete those projects that had been previously approved.
The expense and the revenue both go forward.
So the expense rolls forward, and technically it pulls out of the fund balance where it went to at the end of FY18.
Just to be clear.
Yes, ma'am. So the first, so these first two slides are all general fund items, and the first one is for document management software, and that's a request from our city attorney's office for software that they can use to manage all of their documents. And the second one is the continuation of the battery backup system. That's the one that Patrick referred to earlier to complete the $197,000 purchase that was approved today. We have a request from Street and Bridge, and that is $982,500, and it is set aside to fund mill and overlay on Rio Concho Drive, some Monroe Street repair, and an HA5 and rejuvenator application on streets. That's a request from Street and Bridge. We have a request for carryover of funds for the tree irrigation at Santa Fe Golf Course that was approved earlier last year. We have a request to carry over some funds for Station 618 and Santa Fe crossing improvements. This was some money that was approved but for the use of salary savings within that department. So they had started a lot of those projects but hadn't been able to complete them all at this point. We also have a request for animal shelter improvements of $119,000. Just over $119,000. And then we have a request for the gun range, the roof at the gun range. $9150 will be funded through the police department. The other half of that cost is going to be funded through TML. And then we have a request for $5,000 for hexagon maintenance. That was in addition to what was expected previously for the fiscal year 19.
What's the hexagon?
That's
it's
the
PD as well. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. The new system at the police department. Those were all of the general fund items. We're moving on to other funds now. We have a request for carryover from the Health Department for the purchase of electronic health inspection system. We have the Kirby Park rain capture system in the amount of $15,000. And then we have water and water reclamation projects in the amount of $3.6 million for infrastructure to keep up with the street improvement program.
Attempt to keep up.
Attempts.
She's still trying to cash flow those the best she can.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. We have a request for stormwater funds to be carried over for Sunset Lake dredging and Avenue P drainage, as well as some amount, I think it's to outfit a stormwater truck, a truck that's already been purchased, but for the equipment to outfit that truck. We have a request for carryover for the property casualty insurance fund for farm irrigators that are required to be covered by our internal self-insurance fund. And then we have a request from Civic Events for $24,000 for event scheduling software.
And that was previously budgeted in
The
prior year.
24,000. It was short of 24,000. I believe they had about $13,000 that was budgeted, and they're requesting an additional $11,000 so that they can complete that purchase.
So that isn't totally correct. So there was a shortfall, but they're covering it in their current budget.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. And I think that should be it. Oh, yes, that would be it. So if you have any questions about any of those amendments, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Do we have a motion to accept the,
Move to approve as presented.
okay, thanks, Harry. Second by Lane. Any public comment? With no public comment, we'll take a vote. All in favor of approving the budget amendments, say aye.
Aye.
With none opposed, it passes 6-0.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. We are now going to go into closed session, executive session under the provision of Government Code Title V, Open Government Ethics, Subtitle A, Open Government, Chapter 551, Open Meetings, Subchapter D, exceptions to requirement that meetings be open under the following sections. A, Section 551.0712, consult with attorney when the governmental body seeks the advice of its attorney on a matter in which the duty of the attorney to the governmental body under the Texas disciplinary rules of professional conduct of the State Bar of Texas clearly conflicts with this chapter regarding the solid waste contract. And item B, hold on, make sure I have this right.
There was one more, pivot
have
and
mine?
irrigation services.
Okay, sorry, yeah. So, solid waste contract and the pivot and irrigation services bid, and then item B, Section 551.072, deliberation regarding real property. A governmental body may conduct a closed meeting to deliberate the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property if deliberation in an open meeting would have a detrimental effect on the position of the governmental body in negotiations with a third person regarding Block 65 Fort Concho Edition, 16.36 acres, P. Kuzenacker, S-0647A1566, and San Angelo Regional Airport. We will be out for approximately 1 hour.
45 minutes, I'd say.
I say 45 minutes, but that means an hour, so we'll see you in an hour. To order at 11:50 a.m., and we will start with, Tom, would you like to make an announcement about the pivot and irrigation services bid, please?
Absolutely. Make a motion to award both bids for pivot and irrigation services to Altex Irrigation and Water Logistics.
Second.
Any public comment? With no public comment, we'll take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 6-0. We will now move into item B. Do I need to reread these whole things in context?
Do we have another one?
Don't we have to do this one?
We have another motion. Oh, Harry has one.
Yeah, so, but do I need to read the whole B thing?
No, you don't.
Okay, so Harry, would you like to make an announcement, please?
Sure. Make a motion to authorize the city manager to negotiate the purchase of the north 270 feet of east 1/2 of Block 65 of the Fort Concho Edition, 415 East Avenue A, and to execute all necessary documents.
Any public comment? With no public comment, we'll take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 6-0. On the follow-up and administrative issues, consider items, well, sorry, we just did that. Item B, consider the scheduled city council meetings in December 2018 and January 2019. So at this point in time, the meetings for December will in fact be on December the 4th and December the 18th. All right, and in January, we will move the meeting to the 8th of January because the first Tuesday of the month is New Year's Day. So that meeting will be moved to the 8th, and so we'll have the 8th and the 22nd as the city council meetings.
Let me ask a question about
Sure.
the second meeting in December. Even though the meeting ran long today, my preference, candidly, our staff works, they don't ever really get a break from working on the agenda. They're always working on the agenda. It would be my preference, unless the staff is aware of something that is coming forward that we have to meet on the 18th, that we give our staff a break from the 4th to the 8th. That's my thought.
I just get nervous about year ending, and
Teresa, are you aware of
Daniel.
anything? Julia, are you aware of anything?
I know there are some planning items that have been noticed, but the notice for the second meeting was wrong, so they're going to have to reissue those anyway. The only other thing we were planning on bringing that second meeting in December is some food truck provisions, but those are all related to the zoning ordinance. And so we were going to delay enforcement of those for a few months to let people have time to comply anyway. So there's not going to be any detriment other than they will not be aware of what's passed by the first meeting.
Mayor, my preference would be to go ahead and do the first meeting in December. Now, the second meeting in December, I do agree. Thank you for that, Tommy. Also, we do have staff that has to take their vacation hours. A lot of them do it in December before they lose those hours carried over into January. So my preference would be, if anything, just to do that first meeting in December and not the second one in December.
just clarify for me, because, so the days off and available are October 1 to September 30th? Because you said they have to take them in December versus, why is that?
December's the last month to be able to use your hours.
Got it.
So again, there's a lot of individuals that worked a lot of hours that quite frankly couldn't take time off during the year. And normally it slows down a little bit in December. That's the time that they do decide they can take those.
Okay, so with that, I guess we're going to have one meeting in December, which will be on the 4th. At this point, we're not going to plan on having a meeting on the 18th, and then the meetings in January will be on the 8th and the 22nd.
Head count, I will not be here the 4th. I'll be going to Vegas for PRCA meetings.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
And I'm flying
Yeah.
out of here.
Are you flying out of here?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Every
Just
time.
making sure.
Just make sure. So I don't know if there's important things coming up the 4th. I don't know. Is everybody else going to be here?
Well, let me ask you a question. Would it work better to move the meeting from the 4th to the 11th and have only one meeting?
Back and go for one on the 11th.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's meet on the 11th.
I was just going to ask about notifications that may have already gone out.
I'm not sure about the 11th. I can figure that out really quickly.
Okay.
Okay, let me figure
If you'll just look at that real quick, and then that way it's kind of in between, and we'll have a full council.
And I kind of like that idea too, Mayor, moving it to the 11th, because again, you're coming off of the New Year's, and yeah, so.
Well, you're really coming off of Thanksgiving,
You are, and yeah.
so that gives us,
Talking about December 11th, Daniel?
yes, December
Yeah, I'm
11th.
thinking, yeah.
So move that.
Move the 4th to the 11th if we don't have notice problems.
Teresa's on the bat phone right now.
I think January's okay, Mayor, the way you
Yeah,
said it.
good. Yeah.
The 8th in January, Mayor.
8th and 22nd is what
Eve,
you.
are you available? Anytime you're not going to be here?
We're worried. You keep us in check.
Got Candace and Brian back there. We're all good.
Shane, can you be here?
Could you try calling him?
Leave me alone, woman.
Well, that sounds familiar. I was trying to do that with y'all for dinner once.
Oh, there it comes again, Teresa. There it comes again.
So this new phone number I have
don't
is
wanna miss a
obviously
meal
somebody
with Tom.
else's. Yeah.
Now.
Can you be here, Harry?
change it all so I can put it
Teresa, are
down.
you trying to get permission?
That's the thing about changing numbers, you never know whose number.
I hope that's on tape.
You know, they got you saying that on TV.
Yeah, I know, so when it came up, you know what I
Julie's
mean?
over there trying to get permission
It's
too.
like,
Are we golfing that day, honey?
Okay.
Cancel that flight to Hawaii, dear.
We just say that we'll plan for the 11th, and if there's something that, quite frankly, we have to meet on the 5th, we'll just move it back to the 5th.
He said that should be okay.
All good.
so we'll meet on December the 11th, no meeting on the 4th. It will be the single only meeting we have in December. That will be December
Excellent.
the 11th.
Excellent.
Okay. Let's do it. Do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Motion passes 6-0. See ya on the 11th or sometime before.